Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, tere hommikust, labas rytas, labrīt, dobré ráno, good morning. I have the pleasure to welcome you here at the official opening of the Konferencija Century. My name is Michal Švec. I'm the chairperson of the Scandinavian House, the Nordic Culture Center in Prague, and the author and curator of the exhibition you can see in the courtyard. And I'm very happy to welcome you here at the conference, which is co-organized by the embassies of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in the Czech Republic, the Charles University, and the Masaryk University in the Czech Republic. This conference is organized to commemorate 100 years from Czechoslovakian de jure recognition of Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And I think, especially these times, it is very important to commemorate, to celebrate, to learn from these moments and the bonds of between democratic countries in the Europe. And I'm just here to host the first part, so I will keep my part short. And I would like to invite Professor Markéta Křížová, representing the hosting institution, Vice Rector for International Affairs of the Charles University.
Your Excellencies, Madam and Mr. Presidents, Madam and Mr. Ambassadors, spectabiles, honorabiles, cives academici, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to welcome you at Charles University and to contribute to the opening of this important event, and also to pass on the sincerest greetings from Her Magnificence, the Rector of Charles University, Professor Králíčková, who lamentably could not be here because of pressing obligations. But before we open this excellent academic event, I would like you all to ask you all to keep a minute of silence for all those who are suffering during the present war, and also for those who suffer because they are opposing this war publicly. Thank you. It really is a special occasion today, celebrating not only, as we already heard, the 100th anniversary of Czechoslovak de jure recognition of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania as independent states, but also we are celebrating more than 100 years of the study of all three languages and also Baltic cultures in the Czech lands, even before the establishment of Czechoslovakia. We will be hearing the presentations of the result of these studies at Charles University and at Masaryk University, and of course, we will also have a chance to hear from our distinguished guests, academics from the universities of Vilnius and Tallinn. I would really like to thank to all who contributed to the organization of this event, both from those universities and also from the respective embassies, because really it was a great work, but I'm glad it ended in such a great occasion. Just to remind you of history, I'm a historian, so I have to start here. The first translations of Baltic literary texts to Czech language and the first grammars and dictionaries of Baltic languages in Czech date to 19th century. And then the first lectorate of Baltic languages at Charles University was founded exactly 99 years ago, in 1923. So it's almost 100th anniversary as well. The full bloom of Baltic studies in the Czech Republic came since the 1990s. The graduates as well as academics have produced numerous translations of literary works and contributed to the popularization of Baltic history and culture among the Czech public. And I already gave my thanks to the three embassies for organizing this, helping to organize this conference, but there is one more thing to thank for, the long-term support of the lectorates of Baltic languages, both at Charles University and Masaryk University. And not only these lectorates, the support limits, does not limit here. All 3 embassies actively cooperate with the universities. The academics and students are invited to cultural events. There have been numerous donations of books. The cooperation is lively and enriching for both parts. And Charles University and Masaryk University also benefit from Erasmus and other forms of academic mobilities, and also from intergovernmental agreements. There are various scientific and educational projects with universities in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Learning each other's language, being acquainted with the beauties and complexities of different culture traditions makes us, I think, more tolerant, more prone to try to understand each other and to cooperate. With the image of burning Ukraine before our eyes, the brutal and pointless war going on, seeing the suffering of so many men, women, and children, we are even more urgently aware that before how all this is important, how at the first sight very banal declarations about the necessity to communicate, to see each other's point of view, acquire pressing relevance. Therefore, let me thank once more not only to all colleagues who participated in organizing this conference, but to all who, within the academia and outside it, contribute to the mutual understanding among people of different cultures and languages. Thank you.
Thank you for your words, and thank you for hosting
Děkuji.
this conference in this wonderful festive premises of the Charles University. And I'm very happy I can welcome here 5 distinguished guests, excellencies from both the Czech Republic and the Baltic countries. And first of all, I would like to ask Mr. Miloš Vystrčil, President of the Senate of the Parliament of the Czech Republic.
Vážená paní
Dear President or Speaker of the Lithuanian Parliament, dear Victory, and of the Latvian Parliament, and dear Speaker of the House of Deputies, dear Marketa, dear Piri, dear Madam Prorector, and esteemed guests, I want to thank for the fact that on the territory of our most respected university, that of Charles, we can commemorate 100 years of mutual diplomatic relations and cooperation. I am not a historian, I am a politician. And for a politician to be a good one, should be a bit of a historian. If we want to do politics well, it is necessary to know history. Nowadays, when we commemorate 100 years of our political, diplomatic, and economic relations, we should ask ourselves a question. What does the past lead us to, and what we should do today? Václav Havel, back in 1996, obtained a doctorate of honor in Vilnius, and he said in his speech that both we and the Baltic countries lived for a long time in dense, intransparent, and suffocating fog. And we learned to live in a way not to hear anything and not to see anything. And that's the situation in which most citizens live in Russia. Nevertheless, some of them did find their way and learned to survive. When the year of 1989 came in, the Czech Republic and the early 90s in the Baltic countries, we saw that the fog disappeared and everything seemed to be good and well. But we found out that we got responsibility added to freedom, big responsibility for what will come, what will happen to us and to our environment. Many things are different from what we had wished then. We do not have the possibility to delegate the responsibility to others, to someone who will sort it out for us and in our place. We are the carriers of that responsibility, and we should see it through, and that will be important, not only for Ukraine, but for ourselves. Václav Havel also said that what is important for our future after we obtained freedom are two things. One is building up a civic society, because unless we have one, the love for one's nation can pervert into false patriotism and extremism. And one thing that he said is the most important now. He said we must do everything in our power to create a community that will be a source of peace, out of which peace will emanate. And that is our task and purpose, a very difficult one. And that was said back in 1996. So what did we do since then? The European Union got Nobel Prize for Peace in 2012. Sorry. We created a territory that is able to live without wars. And then we come to another thing that Václav Havel mentioned back then. He said that we should be attentive to, or when we try to achieve things that we need to live in peace, we should not forget that while building that community, we must not get into a situation in which quotas, forms, and what specific action will be taken would be the most discussed topics instead of real values. That we should not disperse our activities into maybe the right places for angling. We now rather think of our material security, but we sometimes tend to forget the values that are necessary for us to be able to live in peace. And so the problems are back. We have a war and aggression of Russia against Ukraine is a terrible thing, and Ukrainians fight for us as well. Being members of the EU, and those who still remember what it was like to live in the dense and intransparent and suffocating fog, those should recall the society based on values, that it will be a value society instead of one based on material well-being and comfort. It will be very difficult. In the last 10 years, we mostly concentrated on economic growth, on our holidays, on our well-being. I read in Latvia, and Mostly the revolutions in the Baltic countries are called singing revolutions. And I read that you say in Latvia, we live and therefore we sing. And we sing and therefore we live. So may I say today, we live to protect and defend freedom and democracy. We protect freedom and democracy because we live. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now the President of the Chamber of Deputies of the Parliament of the Czech Republic, Her Excellency Markéta Pekarová-Adamová, for her speech.
Dear speakers, dear ambassadors, dear Vice Rector, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to address you at the opening of this significant conference that commemorates a respectable 100 years from the establishment of diplomatic relations between then Czechoslovakia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. Our common journey through the past century was not simple. On the contrary, our countries had to face aggression of conquerors, and for long dozens of years were under foreign rule. The fact that today we meet as self-confident representatives of free countries is not by accident. For many of our predecessors who lived in less fortunate times, this would be a great dream that came true. Our history was the history of friendships and determination and inspirations. Inspiration that quite a lot of times went beyond the borders of our four countries. The moments when we fought and defied totalitarian regime were welcomed by the whole world. Human chain connecting your three countries became an overture of our Velvet Revolution. 30 years ago, we set off on the journey of the development of peaceful democratic nations. We showed the whole world that our ambitions are to be democratic countries in the future that will be marked by cooperation, tolerance, and prosperity. Our approach was a role model for other countries who wished to take the same path. However, there were others who were concerned by this development because freedom, democracy, and prosperity stood in the way of their power plans. Quite often, it were your three countries who drew attention to the danger that can come from the east again, and they were rousing from the sleep those Europeans who were lulled by the false feeling of triumphant end of histories. It is a shame that in this historical capital that has one of the oldest universities, you were not heard. Some politicians, either from cynical reasons or because they didn't know, didn't want to believe that in Russia, again, a criminal and aggressive regime is coming to its feet again. Present Russian aggression is a challenge which we have to fight together. I'm very proud that our governments are the ones who help these Ukrainians who are so courageous. We send them both arms and humanitarian aid. Prime Minister Fiala was one of the first politicians from Europe who came to visit Kiev under siege. I am very proud also that our soldiers have been contributing to the security of Baltic countries. I believe that the Ukrainians, with the help of Europeans, will defy this foe. And I'm sure that our countries will play a very important part in it. I'm sure that this will open new possibilities for our cooperation for peaceful, democratic and European future of Ukraine and other countries. I am also certain that our descendants will commemorate further hundreds of years of the existence of our mutual relationships as self-confident representatives of free and collaborating countries. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you great success, you and your conference. Thank you.
Thanks to all Czech politicians who are keeping strong bonds between democratic countries in Europe and in the world. And I'm very happy I can welcome here Mr. Jiří Ratas, His Excellency, the President of the Riigikogu of the Republic of Estonia.
Thank you. Honorable President of the Senate, President of the Parliament, dear my colleagues from Lithuania and Latvia, Madam Vice Rector of Charles University, honorable ambassadors, students, and everyone who are attending. First of all, on behalf of our Parliament, I would like to say that how thankful and appreciate we are for organizing this great event to celebrate our 100 years of diplomatic relations between Czech Republic and Baltic countries, and also this really nice exhibition, what we all see in front of the university. I'm really glad to celebrate 100 years of diplomatic relations between Estonia and the Czech Republic. Recently, we also marked 30 years from re-establishing our relations after Estonia restored its independence in 1991. The Czech and Estonian club is also more than 30 years old. Over these 100 years, we have had great moments together, but unfortunately, we have also had to go through some very sad times. Sharing these difficult past experiences has established connections between our people, which are not always visible in normal times. However, with today's Russian aggression against Ukraine, they are clear as daylight. Our societies react to aggression and threats in the same way, and that is not by coincidence. Huge crowds of people in Prague and also in Tallinn are not coincidence. In Estonia, we had the largest mass gathering after regaining our independence in 1991 to support Ukraine. Our people know what is at stake will not be quiet and will do everything to avoid the past repeating itself. Today, all of us, where we are working closely in the European Union and NATO, so we would never again be alone, and might would not make right. In addition to cooperation between our parliaments and also governments, both of societies, our people, have opened their hearts to those who are fleeing from a violent neighbor who is trying to take them back several decades. We will do everything we can to prevent this to happen and to help those who are fleeing war today. The Czech Republic, as well as the Baltic countries, have carried their weight in this regard, and our people are helping in all ways possible. During the past year, we have actively celebrated this 100-year anniversary here in Prague together with our good Baltic colleagues. In October, our embassies opened the Czech-Baltic 100 exhibition in Kampa Park, near our embassy. It has also been visible in other parts of Prague, and starting from today, it is accessible to the guests of this notable university, the Charles University, which is also a close partner to our oldest university, the University of Tartu. In addition to political and economic relations, the Škoda trams and the famous Czech class, the relations between the universities and all cultural contacts are vital. Learning each other languages, our histories, our music and our traditions should always remain among our priorities. I'm really glad that this event today will be a contribution to this goal. And I would like to thank the scholars from Charles University, as well as all scholars who traveled to Prague this morning, whether from Estonia, other Baltic countries, or from Brno, where young people can also learn our language, culture, and history. I really hope that we all enjoy this event today, learn many new things about our countries, and sharing our views. And I really wish all of us fruitful conference today. Thank you.
Thank you for your words, Your Excellency. Thank you for accepting the invitation to open this conference. And it is my great pleasure to invite the guest from Latvia, Her Excellency Inara Murniece, the Speaker of the Saeima of the Republic of Latvia.
Good morning to everyone, my colleagues, speakers, excellencies, ambassadors, colleagues, friends, dear Professor Krzizhova. It's my pleasure to be here with you to mark the centenary of the diplomatic relations between Czechia and the Baltic states. Our countries have a long history of friendship. We are close partners in the EU and NATO. We share the same great European values. My Czech colleague spoke about it, and the same goals of peace and security in Europe. My other Czech colleague spoke about it. But our nations also share a similar history of Soviet oppression and occupation, and later regaining freedom from tyranny. This is why we deeply understand how wrong Putin's war is, and we stand shoulder to shoulder in our support for Ukraine. We know how difficult it is to fight for freedom, but I'm sure we can win. Being here in Prague, let me recall one of the most pivotal moments in the fight against communism, Charter 77. In 1977, Charter 77 was drawn up by brave Czechoslovakian dissidents, including Václav Havel, a crucial moment for the entire Eastern Bloc. Echoes of the Prague Spring reached Baltic states, at that time the occupied Soviet republics, where the miserable reality clashed with the Soviet propaganda of a bright socialistic future. The ideas of Charter 77 also encouraged brave people in the Baltic states. In August 1979, around 40 Baltic dissidents signed the Baltic Charter, named in honor of Charter 77. Coming from occupied nations, they also demanded the right for the Baltic peoples to decide their own fate. They demanded statehood. I remember when in 2008 I visited Prague as a journalist, I attended inspiring exhibition, The Aftermath of the Prague Spring and Charter 77 in the Baltics. Charter 77 and the Baltic Charter are stories of brave people, and they encourage us again. In Russia, where people's minds are paralyzed by propaganda and fear, there are a few brave people that raise their voices against the lies of a tyrant. Their courage gives hope that we might witness the end to this horror. We see the brave Ukrainian nation fighting this absurd war. A few days ago, we, the speakers of Baltic states, visited Kiev. We saw what Ukrainians are going through. It's our duty to help them, and we are helping. Not only our states, but our people are helping, donating, welcoming refugees in their homes. The European Union should be able to find a way to quickly respond to Ukraine's request to accept it as a member state. The EU is not only an organization, but also its citizens. Ukraine must be part of the EU. Our people stand for it, and we must continue to provide all the possible military, humanitarian, and economic aid to Ukraine. Unfortunately, peace in Europe does no longer exist. Putin has destroyed the security order that we had all been building. We take the threat very seriously. Czechia and the Baltic states are part of the EU and NATO. We are lucky. Latvia is grateful that Czech soldiers have their boots on the ground in Latvia, and the Baltic states is a part of NATO enhanced forward presence. We must be prepared to defend the NATO and the EU territories. And we need to maintain our unity we have shown so far in our support for Ukraine. We will win. Thank you.
Thank you for your words, Your Excellency. Thank you for coming from Riga and co-opening the conference. And it is my pleasure to give floor now to Her Excellency Viktorija Čmilytė-Nielsen, the Speaker of the Seimas of the Republic of Lithuania.
Distinguished Mr. President of the Senate, Madam President, dear fellow speakers, Madam Vice Rector, Your Excellencies Ambassadors, dear ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the Charles University for their collaboration in the organization of this conference. The university has an outstanding reputation, and in my country, it is also known for its role as one of the leading Lithuanian studies centers abroad. Started in 1923, the Lithuanian language program at this university keeps producing excellent scholars and professionals who contribute to the strengthening of our relations. I hope that this tradition will continue for years to come. We have come here today to celebrate the centenary of the Czech-Baltic relations. What we celebrate is an inspiring story of friendship and cooperation, which has survived and prevailed through the century of totalitarian rule and oppression. In the decades preceding World War II, Czechoslovakia and Lithuania have established a thriving political, economic, and cultural relationship, which resulted in dynamic trade, important scholarship programs, active exchange between theaters and publishing houses, just to mention a few. Lithuania had even commissioned its tanks and fighter jets from the Czechoslovakian companies. During the 3 decades succeeding the end of the Cold War, we have restored much of the pre-war achievement. Our bilateral trade is booming and should reach 1.2 billion euros this year. Today we don't buy Czech tanks, but we rely on the Czech troops and fighter jets who ensure our collective security as part of the NATO Enhanced Forward Presence Force. And we do buy Škodas for public and personal needs, while the Czechs import our lasers, pharma products, and electronic and navigation equipment. Much has also been achieved in the field of cultural cooperation. The fact that this season, Narodne divadlo, the National Theatre, presents vocalist Sandra Janušaitė as Turandot already comes as a footnote. So established and commonplace our cultural exchanges have become. Even in case of our excellent mutual relations, Lithuania initially had to overcome certain diplomatic obstacles, which only go to show Lithuania's difficult road to international recognition and to the right to be an independent and sovereign state, embraced by other subjects of international law and without any limitations. Today, Ukraine faces a similar challenge. Like Lithuania in 1919-1922, the people of Ukraine are fighting with weapons in their hands for the right to be a nation, to have their own state, and to be able to freely choose their own path of development. Exactly a week ago, I visited Kyiv together with my dear colleagues from Latvia and Estonia. We were the first speakers of parliament to visit it since the start of the war, exactly 1 month after the war has started. Ukraine is today defending not only its honor and dignity, but that of all of us, Europeans. It defends freedom, democracy, and international law. At the same time, missiles and fighter jets are striking across the Ukrainian sky. It is very likely that just as we speak in this very beautiful chamber, children's bodies are recovered from under the rubble. The official children's death toll today is confirmed at 140, but as we were told by the Ukrainian Prime Minister, the real count most likely is much, much higher, because not all of the victims' bodies have been recovered from under the destroyed buildings. The skies over Ukraine are still not safe. The people of Ukraine are in dire need of our help. And while I'm really proud of the unity shown by the EU members at the initial stage, the first bold steps are just the beginning of the road. We must avoid fatigue. Neither should we get used or tired of economic inconvenience. We simply cannot put our own economic loss at the same scale as Ukrainian lives. We must make certain that the sanctions imposed will not be circumvented. We must move forward with the same bold and coordinated response to the continued aggression. We cannot say that we have done everything we can when every day EU pays up to 1 billion euros on a daily basis for Russia for its energy resources, and that money is used to directly fund this war. And among the steps we could take, and that is something we have discussed at length with our colleagues, is to show our support now and the European perspective for Ukraine for the time when the war is over. I think that doing our utmost to ensure that Ukraine gets a chance and becomes a candidate to the European Union as soon as possible is our duty today. A democratic European Ukraine would be Ukraine's biggest victory. The people of Belarus are also fighting for their right to be free. Since August 2020, the elected leader of democratic Belarus, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, is pleading with us to recognize her full-fledged legitimacy and open her offices in our capitals as a way of preserving Belarusian dignity, while Lukashenko continues trading off nation's sovereignty to Putin. Still, after almost 2 years, she has only one office and the West overall waning interest in her fight. If history is to teach us, this conference too should serve this purpose. While celebrating the achievements of this century, we should also remember their beginnings and the pitfalls that could have produced an entirely different outcome. And we should bring these lessons to larger international audiences and make sure that the decisions we make today do not repeat the mistakes of the past. I cannot imagine a better coalition for this purpose than the one present here today. The Czech Republic, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania together are well equipped with historical knowledge in order to alarm our European partners of the dangers that any hesitation would bring today. I also trust that all together we are in a position to rectify that course. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish a good conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for co-opening the conference, and thank all three of you for brave support, for a brave journey to Kiev, and for brave support for Ukraine, which is not just a political gesture, but it's a real support that matters. And we have one more speaker during the opening block. What we are missing is a scholar giving a keynote, so I would like to ask Mr. Luboš Švec, a docent from the Faculty of Social Sciences of the Charles University and a member of Czech-Latvian Society, to open the conference with a keynote on the topic Czechoslovakia and the Baltic States in 1921 and 1991, actors, international and internal factors.
Your Excellencies, Your Magnificences, ladies and gentlemen, I would like us to start mentioning some general similarities and differences between Czechoslovakia and the Baltic states in the interwar period. Which factors connected them, which factors divided them? At first, all young states arose under the umbrella of the Allies from the decay of multinational empires. They were associated with the system established by the Entente powers, especially France and Great Britain, after the First World War. Its weakening and rise of influence of revisionist states negatively affected them. Every impact on European stability deteriorated their position in the eruptive East European area. This is why they hoped for the League of Nations as an instrument for peacekeeping and collective security in Europe. And secondly, they emerged as democratic republics of former non-dominant nations. Their national states were taken for the successful result, culmination of the long-term national emancipation process. The establishment of diplomatic and economic relations between Czechoslovakia and the Baltic states reflected the shifts in the international situation. The attitude of the Czechoslovak government to the Baltics was developing to a large extent within the context of Czechoslovakia's concrete policy towards Russia and Germany, and sometimes also Poland. Czechoslovak diplomacy has remained mainly an observer with certain expectations, and the main interest of Czechoslovakia in the Baltics was economic. The main actors of Czechoslovak foreign policy were President Thomas Garrigue Masaryk and Minister of Foreign Affairs Edvard Beneš. After the First World War, the official Czechoslovak Eastern policy was based on Masaryk's conception of the Russian question, the expectation for breakdown of Bolshevist regime. At first, Czechoslovak diplomacy was quite reluctant to recognize the Baltic states legally and was only slowly changing its attitude. The fundamental change came in 1929 after the final collapse of the anti-Bolshevist forces in Russia. With the gradual stabilization of the Baltic countries demonstrated by the recognition de jure in Paris in January 1921, it was evident that the Czechoslovak government would have to reconsider its evasive position and enter into regular contact. The fact that accelerated the recognition process was the chance of reopening the Russian market due to NEP, new economic policy adopted in Soviet Russia. In spring 1921, Czechoslovak government recognized the Baltic governments de facto and sent consular officials to Riga, Tallinn, and Kaunas. And finally, in the meeting of the 29th December 1921, the Czechoslovak government recognized all Baltic states de jure. The decision was based on the admission to the League of Nations in autumn. Of the three Baltic states, de jure recognition was the most important for Lithuania, which was in specific diplomatic isolation due to the dispute with Poland. The recognition was interpreted as support of Lithuania. Recognition has enabled normalization of political and economic relations. The Czechoslovak diplomats were instructed not to prefer any Baltic state to others. Nevertheless, the development of economic relations proved to concentrate economic activity in Latvia during the 20s and Lithuania in the 30s. In addition to the global economic crisis, the destabilization of European policy and eruption of the Versailles system caused by the drive of aggressive powers was the second negative aspect of the 30s. The ways how to look for the security of these states became different. Czechoslovakia participated in France, Czechoslovakia, the Soviet Union allied triangle. The Baltic states, seeking to avoid the forthcoming war, gradually developed the foreign policy towards neutrality after the example of the Oslo Group. The Baltic official point of view had to remain strictly neutral between enemy blocs to avoid the war conflict. Neither Czechoslovakia nor the Baltic states did manage to defend their independence successfully. After the Second World War, Czechoslovakia restored its statehood, however under Soviet dominance, but the Baltic republics remained permanently annexed by the Soviet Union. Only a few Czechoslovak intellectuals were aware of the tragic fate of the Baltic nations, their occupation, annexation to the Soviet Union, and the Stalinist terror. Finally, the disintegration of the communist system provided a platform for reviving the interest of intellectuals and dissent on both sides. The Baltic People's Front supported Czechoslovak opposition. The Baltic emancipation process attracted the attention of the new political elite, which followed the former sympathy of Czechoslovak dissent in the framework of the human rights policy. The trauma of the Soviet occupation in 1968 helped the Czech public better understand the Baltic situation. The question was whether and how the moral attitude of the opposition would be reflected in real politics after the opposition had come to power in 1990. The attitude of new President Václav Havel cannot be seen only in the fundamental change of Czechoslovak politics in spirit of return to Europe after the fall of the communist regime. His attitude was already expressed in dissent. Charter 77, formulated in an open letter in May 1989 to the German Chancellor, Helmut Kohl, a public call to abolish the consequences of the Pact Molotov-Ribbentrop and support the Baltic nations' right to self-determination. Charter 77 became the first Czechoslovak political organization which took a clear position on the Baltic issue and condemned the annexation of the Baltic states. Václav Havel invited the Speaker of Lithuanian Parliament, Vytautas Landsbergis, to Prague in May 1990. Havel aimed to settle a dispute between Lithuania and the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev understood Havel's invitation as an attempt to intervene in inter-Soviet affairs. Only Landsbergis came to Prague. After the visit of Vytautas Landsbergis in Prague, the presidential office in Prague formulated the gradual conception for the advancement of bilateral Czechoslovak-Lithuanian relations and internalization of the Baltic case, aiming in de jure recognition in future. Regarding the Baltic issue, international, not internal or ethnic conflict between republics and the Soviet center, Václav Havel defended the integration of the Baltic states in all European institutions. Similar to the policy of most Western and Nordic states, Prague supported non-violent political solution to the conflict and considered Gorbachev's approach to the Baltic question a litmus test of the Soviet democratization process. President Havel, the National Assembly and the government condemned sharply Soviet subversive actions against the Baltic republics in January 1991. The condemnation and criticism did not still mean de jure recognition. These questions were settled only after the August Cup 1991. Together with other European states, the Czechoslovak government finally renewed diplomatic relations with the Baltic states on 29 August 1991. At the beginning of September 1991, Minister of Foreign Affairs Jiří Dienstbier came to Tallinn to meet with Baltic Ministers of Foreign Affairs to sign a protocol on the establishment of diplomatic relations. Conclusion, lesson learned. Czech-Baltic relations cannot be assessed only bilaterally. European conflicts in the 20th century have never been isolated. Neither Czechoslovakia nor the Baltic countries did not manage to escape from the war. Both Czechoslovakia and Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania gradually became victims of the aggression of totalitarian neighbors in 1938, 1940. At the beginning of the 90s, the situation changed and was absolutely different. Both Czechoslovakia and the Baltic states wanted to get out of the former Soviet or Russian dependence. With the collapse of the Soviet bloc and the deep crisis of the Soviet internal system, conditions were created that enabled the restoration of the sovereignty of both Central European states and the Baltic republics. Following European integration has brought common goals and values to all countries. After the experience of the turbulent 20th century, the integration into European structures seemed to be the most suitable, proper instrument for providing soft and hard security. It became a common goal of both the Czech Republic and the Baltic states, a goal that united them again. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Švec, for your keynote, and thanks to all speakers during the official opening. I can say the conference is officially open. And I have just two announcements. I would like to ask Your Excellencies to gather for the family photo at the courtyard outside in front of the building. And here? And also here, so we start here and then outside, and then the members of Czech-Latvian Society and the students of Latvian are asked to take a picture with Her Excellency, the Speaker of the Saeima, in front of the building. So please enjoy the coffee break, and the next part starts 9:05. Thank you very much.
Shall we get started? So now we shall get started our historical section. I'm very glad that I have opportunity to see and welcome in Prague my colleagues from Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. I'm glad that there is opportunity to meet in the conference after COVID time, after various lockdowns. We have 3 items on our program list. The first, Dalia Bukalevičiūtė from Faculty of History, Vilnius University. Dalia deals with interwar-Lithuanian history, with bilateral relations of Lithuania and Czechoslovakia, or Czech Republic. She published a book on relations between Czechoslovakia and Lithuania in the interwar period. Dalia? And Dalia studied at Charles University too. Yeah, may I ask you for coming? Dalia, you have the floor.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues from Baltic states, from Czech Republic and from Slovakia, and now we will discuss about our history, our state's history, our past, and what does it means for our present days. And my paper is about Lithuanian, Latvian, and Estonian recognition de facto and de jure from Czechoslovak side in 1921, but when it reached our countries, it was 1922, January. And I will mark some cases about our first relations. So the independent state of Lithuania restored on 16 February 1918 had to travel a long road towards its international recognition. At the beginning of February, the Council of Lithuania applied the nations of the world, asking them to recognize the independent state of Lithuania within its ethnographic borders. However, the recognition depended on the international and geopolitical balance of powers, which was established in Europe in the wake of the First World War. It depended on the vision of the future of Germany and Russia, as well as the position of the great powers, namely France, Great Britain, and US. Imperial Germany was the first to grant its de facto recognition to Lithuania on 23rd March 1918, but one of the conditions it had to fulfill was the establishment of the close ties with Germany. Until the end of the war, in November, Lithuania was still facing the threat of becoming a province governed by Germany within the Council of Lithuania acting as a formal administrative body. At that time, the possibility of proclaiming Lithuania's monarchy was even considered in the summer of 1918. The first government of Lithuania was formed on 11 November only. At the First World War also marked the emergence of a new state of Czechoslovakia, which proclaimed its independence on 28 November 1918. Most historians agree that we cannot compare the creation of Czechoslovakia in Central Europe after the collapse of Austro-Hungarian Empire and the establishment of Lithuania in Eastern Europe after the dissolution of the Russian Empire. There are many differences and there were discussions in the matter of another study. The key difference is that the countries which won the war supported the creation and the recognition of Czechoslovakia. Meanwhile, their position on the question of Lithuania diverged. In 1919, when the future of the post-World War and state borders, including those of Czechoslovakia, were being decided by the Paris Peace Conference, Lithuania was forced to engage in an armed fight for its independence. Lithuania found itself in the epicenter of the Polish-Soviet War. In the emerging Lithuanian army and volunteers joined so-called Lithuanian Wars of Independence with Soviet Russia in the first half of 1919 and with the West Russian Volunteers Army, also known as Bermontians, in the second half of 1919. In the spring of the same year, Lithuania was forced to fight with Poland, which launched an offensive and captured Vilnius in April. It was also the decisive period for Russia's future existence. The civil war between the Reds and Whites broke out. As a consequence, Lithuania was not invited to Paris and equal rights, but as an observer only. The principle of self-determination of nations was discussed at the conference, but realpolitik, it means the question of one and indivisible Russia without Poland and Finland, was more important. Such a position was followed by US. France balanced between indivisible Russia and creation of a new Polish state. Meanwhile, Great Britain was neither particularly in favor to restoration of the Russian Empire nor the Polish interest in changing Russia. It turned out that the Paris Peace Conference, that Czechoslovakia advocated the position of the great powers. It means associated the future of the Baltic states with Russian question. Czechoslovakia's first Prime Minister, Karl Kramarič, did not conceal his Russophile attitudes, favored the idea of indivisible Russia and fight against the Bolsheviks. President Masaryk and Foreign Minister Beneš did not support Pilsudski's invasion to the east, the separatism of the Baltic states and Ukraine. Kramarič, who was no longer in office, addressed the Lithuanian representative Naruševičius in Paris, proposing to negotiate a federation with Russia and pointing out that Russia would consider its strength in the future and would not allow to the Baltic coast to stand in its way. Lithuania could not agree with such proposal as it would not be aligned with the fundamental and elementary determination of the Lithuanian nation and government. In 1919, Lithuania was looking for ways to establish at least minimal contacts with the Czechs. Any arising questions concerning passports, documents, repatriation of refugees were settled through the diplomatic missions in Berlin. For the first time in February 1919, in Berlin was inquired whether the Czechs would agree to admit a Lithuanian representative. The answer was negative on the grounds that the great powers were disposed negatively towards Lithuania. When the same question was given to Kramarz again, it means in September 1919, he replied that it would demonstrate disloyalty to Russia. Naturally, in the midst of military conflicts, Lithuania could not expect a prompt international recognition. Nevertheless, in 1919, when the government of Lithuania was already in office and the country was trying to lay the foundation of its strength independently, 6 countries, namely Latvia, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Great Britain, and Japan, granted via de facto recognition. Great Britain's de facto recognition of 22nd September 1919 was very important, as it meant that the attitude of the great powers towards the Baltic region and Lithuania was gradually changing. In fact, Great Britain had its own interests. It hoped that after Lithuania and other Baltic states were recognized as independent states, the region would become a gateway for Britain into Russian market. And it would provide an opportunity to weaken Russia and eventually prevent the Russian-Germany collaboration. France started changing its position as well. In October 1919, the representatives of all 3 Baltic states were promised de facto recognition, because de jure recognition was not yet possible until the Russian question was resolved. Between 1919 and 1920, it gradually became apparent that the Whites were losing the civil war, and the hopes of the restoration of indivisible Russia were fading away. As the front line in Polish-Soviet war stabilized around Molėtai and Červintos, it means Lithuania fell within the sphere of Soviet influence. The Soviet-Lithuanian peace treaty was signed on 12 July 1920. Moscow recognized Lithuanians' independence and neutrality, its territory with the capital of Vilnius. The de facto and de jure recognition, this de facto and de jure recognition was an important turning point, accelerating international recognition. In fact, how late France fulfilled its promise and recognized Lithuania de facto on 11 May 1920, the same was done by Poland on 4th July. In 1920, when Lithuania and Czechoslovakia were actively restored via relations with Poland at the international level regarding Vilnius and Teschin regions, we have few mutual contacts. The official Czechoslovak foreign policy had to accept the reality, to look for the compromise with Warsaw and to agree with Polish-Soviet border delineated by the Treaty of Riga on 18th March 1921. All through Masaryk nor Beneš believed in this eastern border of Poland. Lithuanian politicians tried to take advantage of the geopolitical changes. The members of parliament attempted to speed up the recognition process. It was also provided for the Lithuanian government program for 1920. In 1921, Lithuanian Foreign Minister Purickis called for more active diplomatic actions to speed up the recognition of Lithuania by Czechoslovakia. Initiative was taken in Paris and Tallinn. The positive response from Prague was received on 16 June. It was noted that there are meetings with an exchange of representatives, but recognition is not yet possible. In Rome, the Czechoslovak diplomat admitted to Lithuanian diplomat Šalių that at present no one believes in the restoration of Russia with the old borders. And Lithuania should see closer cooperation with Latvia, Estonia, and Finland. The appointment of representatives was decided in Berlin in summer of 1921. On 22nd July, the Czechoslovak government inquired the Lithuanian government whether it would agree to establish closer relations and to admit a consul. On 14th of August, Lithuania agreed to admit Czechoslovak representative Jaroslav Gala, who arrived in Lithuania at the end of September. From 10th October, he acted as vice consul and worked until cross-border relations were established. At that time, Lithuania considered appointing the signatory of Act of Independence 16 February Donatas Malinauskas to act its representative in Czechoslovakia. However, Lithuania did not delegate its official representative. Instead, it sent a representative of Ministry of Agriculture, Albinas Rimka, to Prague in early September. Officially, he had to familiarize himself with the implementation of the agricultural reform, but in reality, his powers were broader. He held meetings with the officials of Czechoslovak Foreign Ministry, the representatives of political parties, and the press. After a month in Czechoslovakia, he concluded that Czechs were poorly informed about the Baltic affairs in general. There are still thoughts about federations or a union between the Slavs and Baltic nations. Nevertheless, he imagined the relations could be established for three reasons. First, Lithuania and Czechoslovak disagreements with Poles. Second, there was no port important for Russia in the territory of Lithuania. And second, trade relations. Gala's unclear activities in Kaunas were causing a certain tension, and on 11th October, a member of Lithuanian parliament, Vincas Čepinskis, inquired the Lithuanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs as to the grounds on which the Czechoslovak Council was admitted, because this country has not yet even recognized Lithuania de jure. He resented that Czechoslovakia had no recognized Lithuania and was not even planning to grant its de jure recognition in order to please Russia. Meanwhile, in the parliament sitting on 21st November, he asked openly, to what ends is he working here? Realizing the gravity of the situation, Gale urged the Czechoslovak government to speed up the recognition process, starting the Czechoslovak position in getting worse every day, despite the correctness of the politicians in power. On 23rd November, replying to him, the Lithuanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs outlined that there is no single reasons why the Council could not be admitted. Relations to be established in order to promote economic and cultural cooperation. Czechoslovakia did not vote against Lithuania, was admitted to the League of Nations. Besides, there was information that in short run, Czechoslovakia would recognize Lithuania de jure. In the course of 1921, 7 more countries granted via recognition to Lithuania. It means Estonia, Denmark, Switzerland among them. Meanwhile, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Latvia recognized Lithuania de jure as we had already granted de facto recognition before. It is natural that the Czechoslovak recognition was very welcome in Lithuania. Even the newspaper Tribuna, supporting the Czechoslovak government, did not spear criticism at the end of December 1921, stating that the recognition already granted by a number of countries had not in any way influenced the Czechoslovak government, whose position was related to one and indivisible Russia. It was noted that Lithuania's recognition was delayed despite the necessity to develop economic relations. Czech diplomats acknowledged that they fear to sign against the sympathies with Russia. On 29 December 1921, the Czechoslovak government took a decision to recognize three Baltic states, de facto and de jure in once. On 5th January 1922, the Czechoslovak Minister of Foreign Affairs communicated this decision to all delegations. As a result, this date was considered the date of recognition in Lithuanian historiography. After receiving this message, Poland protested against during its diplomatic mission in Riga. It is not clear why the news of the recognition took time and Vice Consul of Czechoslovakia, Gala, only received it on 21st January. On the same day, he took it to Lithuanian Foreign Minister Jurgutis. 2 days later, it means 23rd January, an official notification of Czechoslovak Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Beneš was handed over to the chairman of Lithuanian Parliament, Seimas, and acting President Aleksandras Stulginskis, who in turn sent the greeting telegram to President Masaryk and Jurgutis to Minister Beneš. The Parliament was informed about it on 24th January. The news appeared in the press only on 26th January only. The Lithuanian Parliament, the society and press welcomed the de jure recognition from Czechoslovakia, which was repeated called a friendly state. After recognition, the issues of diplomatic representations were reserved. Lithuania agreed to admit Lithuanian Charge d'Affaires Malinauskas, who presented his credentials to President Masaryk on 25th March. On 7th March, Lithuania agreed to open a Czechoslovak consulate, with Gala appointing a consul. After full-fledged relations were established, a secret meeting of the Lithuanian government was held on 11th March, during the first following assignments were given to Malinauskas. First, to explain Lithuania's disagreements with Poland to his friends and influential figures. Second, to obtain the de jure recognition from Yugoslavia and Romania. Third, to raise the Czechoslovak interest in the trade with Lithuania. Fourth, to make the requirements preparation for the printing of Lithuanian money in Czechoslovakia. Fifth, Russian colonies need to be handled with great care, as Czechoslovaks were sympathizing with them. Russians should be drawn out to our side. And sixth, to maintain the best possible relations with the Ukrainian people and to support their national aspirations to restore the Ukrainian state, because they can be useful for Lithuania in order to weaken the Russian state, from which side we are already in danger. It was the task for first Lithuanian Charge d'Affaires Malinauskas when our relations was restored. Thank you very much.
Dalia, thank you very much for your contribution about complicated Lithuanian situation and establishment of relations with Czechoslovakia. The second item on our program list is a presentation or report on approach of the Baltic states to the Czechoslovak crisis, Munich 1938. I would like to invite my colleague Magnus Ilmiev. Magnus, take the floor. A few words about Magnus Ilmiev, former director of the Institute of History of the Academy of Sciences.
Former director.
Yeah.
Director.
And he published, he deals with interwar Estonian history, and he published a book, Silent Submission, which was translated and published in 5, 6, 7 languages.
Latvian, this is in progress, and Estonian, Russian and English in Stockholm.
And Swedish?
No.
Yeah.
Not yet.
A good work done.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, at first, many thanks to organizers for the opportunity to take part in the conference in this beautiful hall today. Czechoslovakia's relations with Hitler's Germany as well as with Poland were linked in 1938 to the preservation of peace and stability in Europe. In fact, in that year, the fate of Czechoslovakia became a critical question, especially in European diplomatic circles and in the press, but also among the general public. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were no exception in this. Throughout the post-war period, the question of whether the vastly bigger catastrophe of the Second World War could have been avoided has been debated. The Munich Pact and the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact were both important factors leading the catastrophe. Internationally, the Munich Pact means the destruction of Czechoslovakia and the essential liquidation of the Versailles system and League of Nations and the principle of collective security. In September 1934, the Soviet Union became a member of the League of Nations. It is impossible to underestimate the importance of this event, which granted the Soviet Union a voice in the politics of Europe. On May 2, 1935, a mutual assistance pact between France and the Soviet Union was concluded in Paris. 2 weeks later, the mutual assistance pact between the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia was concluded. A completely new situation in European politics was created by the circumstance that the Soviet Union for the first time ever entered into a military alliance with the two European states on the basis of League of Nations covenant. The Article 16 of the covenant stated that League members must jointly support each other, take extraordinary measures against the state that had violated the League precepts, that they must take necessary steps to allow the military units of another member state in the fulfillment of the obligations outlined in the pact passage through their territory. The cited section placed on member states the unconditional obligation to permit the passage of armed forces and to assist them. The Tallinn, Riga, and Riga expediently questioned Soviet diplomats about how the Soviet Union would be able to assist France and Czechoslovakia as there are not have a common borders with the state that might become an aggressor. Soviet representatives were not able to answer this question in a satisfactory manner. The answer that sounded was that the issue of troop transit was mostly theoretical. It must be admitted that the application of Article 16 introduced an element of danger into the security of the Baltic states and also Romania and Poland. For example, if the League of Nations had declared Germany an aggressor state, the application of sanctions would have made it possible for the Soviet Union to utilize the harbors and airfields of the states involved, as well as give the Soviet Union the right to have its military forces march through the territories of the Baltic states. The authorities of Tallinn and Riga assumed that after the destruction of aggression forces, the Soviet military would refuse to leave the country. If the Soviet Union wanted to hide its allies in case of war with Germany without being sanctioned by League of Nations Council, the Soviet Union could only participate in the war against Germany on the Baltic Sea. For the Soviet Union, the utilization of higher passage over Latvia and Lithuania would prove unrealistic and inefficient, whereas the employment of its land forces would require their marching through the southern part of Latvia and also through Lithuania. Poland and Romania. Assuming that the German Navy might try to use the Baltic coast and Iceland in the Baltic Sea as its strongholds to the Soviet Union in order to forestall the German invasion would have to occupy Estonia or request on the basis of Article 16 of the League of Nations for the right to march through the territories of the Baltic states. Similarly, economic and political aspects of the situation could not be ignored, as the Baltic states depended on foreign trade. Considering the possibility of war with France as well as with Czechoslovakia and Soviet Union, Germany was especially interested in the disintegration of the League of Nations. On July 1938, the German foreign office dispatched a circular to all its diplomatic representatives stationed in the small states of Europe. This circular registered that the representatives announced to the governments of the states that the only way for them to retain their neutrality in the coming international conflict would be to unconditionally denounce Article 16 of the League of Nations. Berlin determined that in case the Soviet Union provided military assistance to Czechoslovakia, the Estonia and Latvia should defend Poland and Germany along their eastern borders. On the other hand, Poland itself was interested in participating in the act of breaking up Czechoslovakia and in claiming some parts of it, namely Teschen. Poland, while focusing on the Czechoslovak crisis, also tried to strengthen its position in the Baltics. The leaders of Polish defense and foreign policy also attempted to influence the Baltic states to take a stand in regard to the sanctions of League of Nations. Thus, the interests of Poland and Germany considered in this respect. Also, Poland wanted to conduct an entirely independent foreign policy. Great Britain too finally decided similar manifesto to Great Britain too finally decided against the application of sanctions, fearing that the Czechoslovak crisis might turn into a straight-out war. In the spring and summer of 1938, the representatives of the Soviet Union repeatedly declared in their speeches as well as in their private talks that the Soviet Union was ready to assist Czechoslovakia in case of an attack from Germany. Moscow viewed the neutrality of the Baltic states as totally illusory, and the Soviet press also published similar views. In the spring and summer of 1938, France, through the good offices of Foreign Ministry, attempted to convince Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states to open their borders for the Red Army in case of war. On September 1938, at the peak of the Czechoslovak crisis, the Estonian and Latvian foreign ministers declared to the General Assembly of the League of Nations that their government reserved the right to decide on their own and on a case-by-case basis when to employ the regulations of Articles 16. Consequently, the Lithuanian foreign minister jointly with Polish and Romanian ministers presented a similar manifesto to the General Assembly on September 22. Actually, the cooperation of the Baltic states in declaring the application of Article 16 optional was initiated partly by the insistence of Estonia, but also under the pressure of Germany and Poland. In August, the Soviet Union formed a special corps to send to Czechoslovakia, and Soviet units on western border had been placed to the highest level of combat readiness. At the end of September, maneuvers of the Soviet Baltic Fleet took place. During 18 September, Germany began to amass its forces at the Czechoslovak borders. On September 23, Czechoslovakia began a general mobilization. Poland wanted to seize the Teschen area and at the same time to prevent the Soviet Union from hiding Czechoslovakia. The Lithuanian military staff ordered in September that the garrisons institute a heightened degree of readiness. Reservists were called to training for the period of September 1 to 22. In spite of the fact that the Lithuanian government attempted to demonstrate their neutrality during the crisis, several of their government members and military leaders expressed Soviet-friendly anti-German and anti-Polish opinions. In the case of Lithuania, the support of government and military leaders for the League of Nations Pact is evident. Latvia too concluded military maneuvers. According to military exercises, the Latvian army was expected to take on an attack from the south, that is, from Germany, and to hold the line until reinforcements arrived from the east, that is, from the Soviet Union. During the crisis, several Latvian military leaders inclined towards Czechoslovakia and Soviet Union. On September 24, the Latvian military attaché Jānis Salitis assured Czechoslovak military attaché in Latvia and Estonia Oldrich Varsky in the name of the three Baltic states that if Germany and Poland attacked Czechoslovakia and the Soviet Union provided aid to the victim, all the Baltic states would side with the Soviet Union. Readiness to fight with the Soviet Union against Germany was expressed by several members of the Latvian military. General Robert Tampitis, retired General Jekab Ruskevich, and Minister of War, Vice President Jānis Palodis. Let us note here that some of the Latvian diplomats and military often made statements in the name of the three Baltic states which did not correspond to reality. Estonia did not mobilize its forces during the Czechoslovakian crisis. At the end of September, the Czechoslovak envoy Jaroslav Seinoha forwarded to Prague the opinion of the Estonian army commander Johan Laidoner that he believes that the great powers will reach an agreement on Czechoslovakia. But in reference to Estonia, it is noteworthy that certain safeguards were put in place. The Soviet political intelligence agency could hold a telegram sent to Rome on September 27 by Italian representative in Tallinn. Its contents can be summarized as follows. In case of world war, a state of affairs had to be created in which Estonia, Latvia and Poland would oppose the Red Army. On October 8, after the crisis had been resolved, Zenocha informed Prague that keeping in mind the possibility of Soviet march through the area, consultations were held in Tallinn with participation of Polish and Finnish officers and the assistant of the Chief of Staff of Sweden. The conference in Munich took place from September 29 to 30. Four great powers took upon themselves the right to decide the fate of Sudetenland, and Germany then gained the right to occupy the Sudetenland. England and France, states with huge resources, unexpectedly quickly agreed to Germany's demands. On October 1, Poland presented Czechoslovakia with an ultimatum to hand over Teschen area and occupied it. The Czechoslovak envoy Zenocha wrote on October 8 that with the danger of worldwide conflict, Estonia had begun to tremble in fear of war and the march of foreign armies through its territories. That the Soviet army was pictured rightly or wrongly as bringing with it the Bolshevik horror, deportations, and an end to the Estonian people. Zenocha emphasized that the German threat was more removed from the Estonians, even through official declarations stated that neutrality would provide protection against Germany as well. Estonian politicians and officials expressed on the one hand their sympathy to the Czechoslovakia over the Munich decision, while on the other hand they also congratulated the winners, Germany and Poland. For example, the opinion expressed by Foreign Minister Karl Zelter on the occupation of the Teschen area was, according to the Polish envoy, as follows: Poland should get that which truly belongs to it. A Czechoslovak diplomat noted that after the Munich Pact, Estonian officials and officers believed that the democracies were rotted through and that the Red Army was incapable of fighting. Czechoslovak diplomat noted that among the higher ranks in military, the belief had taken root that war between the Soviet Union and Germany was unavoidable, even though it was further away than was to be hoped. According to Army Commander Laidoner, Czechoslovakia, unlike Estonia, state born not through military action but a result of machinations by the great powers at the end of the World War, had eventually perished because it lacks the necessary military mentality. Estonian President Konstantin Päts, in a confidential conversation with the Polish envoy, also expressed the belief that the threat would only affect states that were created at the Green Table. It means Treaty of Versailles. Many Estonian diplomats and politicians believed that Munich represented a significant landslide in foreign policy and the politics of war to the benefit of Germany. The Czech diplomats in Riga characterized the prevalent mood in Latvia after the events in Munich as Germanophobic, emotionally Russophobic and Anglophilic. Envoy Pavel Barachek-Saguer also noticed that Germanophobia among members of the government. This was, however, only partially true. After the Munich Pact, the Latvian War Minister Palodis declared that all patriotic Latvians, particularly those in the military service, had cordial feelings towards the Russians and therefore would never join the Polish or German camps. At the same time, many of the Barachek communications and conversations with Latvian diplomats contained accusations that Foreign Minister Wilhelm Smunters and Latvian government were oriented in foreign policy toward Germany. In fact, Munters gave the following statement to the Czechoslovak envoy in Riga concerning decisions of the Munich Conference. This is the first diplomatic loss that England and France have ever endured. They will pay for this with the loss of prestige and influence in the whole world. To the British envoy Ore remarked about Munders, "I found him greatly relieved that thanks to the Prime Minister efforts, peace had been preserved." Mr. Munders agreed that it was a great gain from the Prime Minister's visits to Germany. According to the Czechoslovakia envoy Jan Skalitski, there were those in Lithuanian military leadership who during the crisis raised the questions of outcome of Red Army's possible passage through Lithuania, fearing that it could be beginning of Lithuania's Bolshevizations. The Munich Pact created only negative feelings in Foreign Minister Stasys Lozoraitis. He stated to the Czechoslovak envoy that Munich would lead to a loss of fight in both old and new agreements and the dissolution of the European security system. Lozoraitis' statement to the British representative was no different. Collective security and the League of Nations as a mediator in international conflicts are a thing of the past. The Munich Pact elicited greater impression from many Lithuanian diplomats. For example, the envoy in Paris, Petras Klimas, used phrases in his presentations such as era of the international gangsterism, extremely egoistical, unprincipled politics and denial of international morality. And now, some conclusions. The decision of the Baltic states, Poland and Romania regarding Article 16 was interpreted by the Soviet Union as a message that the states would not agree to grant passage for the Red Army to aid Czechoslovakia and would repulse any attempt by the Red Army to pass through the territories located between the Soviet Union and Germany. Declaring Article 16 optional helped to resolve the Czechoslovak crisis in favor of Germany. Munich had far-reaching consequences. As a result of the agreement, the influence of England and France on European politics lessened. The superiority of power England and France had enjoyed in Europe was gone, and the balance of power in Europe swung in Germany's favor. Lithuania's special relationship with the Soviet Union had come to a sudden end. The prevailing mood in Latvia at the time the Munich Pact was signed led to conviction among Estonian foreign and defense policy makers that Latvia as Estonian military ally would not fight with Estonia against the Soviet Union. Lithuania's loss of Klaipėda-Memel must be seen in the context of Germany's appeasement by the Western powers. In Latvia, too, there developed doubts before and after the Munich Pact that Poland could enter into a secret pact with Germany at the expense of the Baltic states. The Estonian political and military leaders were convinced that the existence of powerful Polish state was one of the preconditions of the security of Estonia and Latvia. The Baltic states drew their own conclusions about the Munich Pact and the resulting situation in Europe. It was understood that should a new crisis develop, England, France and the League of Nations were powerless to guarantee the security of Eastern Europe. After the Munich Pact chose in the Baltic states who saw in Germany the only power capable of opposing the Soviet Union gained in strength. We should emphasize here that Estonia, Latvia and Poland underestimated the stabilizing role of Czechoslovakia in Central Europe. Czechoslovakia's weight can be used as an illustrating example in discussion of democratic versus authoritarian political systems. Czechoslovakia was a democratic state, but nevertheless lost its independence because of deals concluded between the great powers. Actually, Czechoslovakia collapsed because of the internal conflicts between different national subgroups, Czech, Slovaks, Sudeten Germans, and also Hungarians residing in the country. The Baltic states and Czechoslovakia after the Munich Pact are an example of bandwagoning or choosing the politics of accommodation and trying to avoid that which could be seen as opposition to Germany. The end of Czechoslovak independence came in March of 1939. The conclusion of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact brought with it in August-September of 1939 the accommodation politics of the Baltic states with respect to the Soviet Union. Czechoslovakia disappeared from the map of Europe for 6 years, and the Baltic states, as a result of the events of 1939-1940, for a total of 51 years. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Magnus. Let's move to the third contribution, the third item. I would like to introduce Kristine Ante. She is connection between Czech and Latvian scholars, and she worked at the Institute of Latvian History, and she was in position of chief editor of the main Latvian historical journal. Now she is at Charles University, Faculty of Philosophy. Take the floor, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first let me congratulate you on this important occasion we're all lucky to witness today. We have the opportunity to celebrate 100th anniversary of establishment of diplomatic relations between Czechoslovakia and Baltic countries. I'm a historian coming from Riga, and I have lived and worked in Czech Republic for 8 years now. During this time, I could learn more about this country, and also I have a privilege to teach Latvian language in Prague and Brno. Both professionally and privately, I meet people from broad circles of the Czech society and try to be a good representative of Latvia in this country. Although my research interests are not related to diplomacy or the 20th century, I still gladly accepted this invitation to address this conference. I would like to present a brief subjective insight about the perception of Baltic countries by the modern Czech society. I don't intend to come up with an analytic in-depth research project, as much more time and human resources would be needed for this type of research. In my presentation, I will talk about the perception of Baltic countries in the Czech Republic. I will talk about general perception, recognition of state capitals, and the impact of Soviet times. I will also talk about certain linguistic specialties concerning the perception of Baltic countries, as well as the influence some recent events had for this perception. It is all well-known fact that no democratic society is homogeneous. People's opinions differ depending on their education, income level, and political opinions. Thus, speaking about how much Czechs know about the Baltic countries, the answer depends on several aspects. Taking it from the most important to the least, overall education level is most important, followed by being interested in global or regional processes and the environments where a person lives or with which a person has contacts. By summarizing my observations, I interviewed some people and have defined several points about how the Baltic countries are perceived here. First, Baltic countries are perceived as unified whole. I should admit straight away that this kind of perception can be also observed when speaking with people from other European countries, and not exclusively Czechs. People often think that these countries are either identical or at least very similar, that their social, political, and economic situation is very much alike. Very few people are aware that irrespective of common history and Western orientation, the internal policy and future vision of these countries differs. Lithuania has much closer links to its neighboring country Poland, with whom it cooperates in resolving both economic issues and the matters relevant to Polish minority. Estonia clearly positions itself as a Nordic country and was following up the processes in Finland during the Soviet era by identifying itself with this Nordic neighbor. As to regarding Latvia as a country situated between Lithuania and Estonia, it has often found itself at crossroads and has not always been able to clearly define its priorities, trying to follow several directions at once. The reference to Latvia being the bridge between East and West can often be heard in Latvia. In any case, the affiliation of the Baltic countries to a particular geopolitical or geographic area is a separate theoretical issue, which my colleague Josef Miškovský, I hope, will discuss later. As different countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia all have their distinct strengths and weaknesses. The question is whether these are visible from outside. When this matter is discussed with Czechs, it should be admitted that the overall level of awareness about economic and social issues is not high enough to be able to distinguish this. What a Czech person can see on a daily basis is the same as encountered by any foreigner, I think, visiting the Baltic countries as a tourist. The first impressions are provided by the city environment, nature, public transportation, road conditions, people, and of course, the language situation. However, it should also be remembered that only few Czechs stay in Baltic countries for extended time. Most of them visit the national capitals for a few days, eventually also travel around the country by car. They visit some cultural monuments, museums, and nature insights. But they do not engage in deeper contact with local people. Tourists representing older generation also tend to choose organized trips, which allows them to experience a program prepared by a particular guide or a tourist firm without gaining authentic insight as an individual traveler. The respondents whom I have interviewed answered the question about their and their friends' perception about the Baltic countries before visiting the region. Their responses indicate that most of them knew that, and I quote, "These are some inexpensive remote countries where people speak a language which is similar to Russian." Of course, this is far from reality. However, an opinion like this can still be heard. The linguistic situation is different in each Baltic country. To a large extent, this is determined by both the language policy and the proportional share of Russian-speaking people in each country. However, it can be clearly stated that the younger generation does not know Russian, at least not at the same level as their parents, and feel much more comfortable communicating in English. Second, my thesis, recognition of national capitals. The national capitals are much more recognized than the Baltic countries themselves. My subjective observation shows that Riga is the best known from all the Baltic capitals. It is difficult to explain this phenomenon. Maybe several important international events that have taken place in Riga in the past have contributed to its recognition. The situation is to a large extent similar in the rest of Europe. People who don't know much about Baltic countries, including the ones not knowing anything at all, still recognizes Riga. Third, Baltic countries here are associated as a part of former Soviet Union. Older generations still remember political maps where all the territory of the USSR was painted in the same color. This has created a certain perception that this is a unified country where everybody's lives was more or less the same. There was, of course, a lot of centralization, and attempts were made to make all the Soviet republics the same. However, this never succeeded. The Baltic Soviet republics were always different from the rest of the Soviet Empire. They were perceived as different as the West within the USSR. When it was not possible to travel to the West itself, the Western trends could at least be experienced by visiting a capital in the Baltic countries. This referred to the city architecture, culture, life, by clothing trends and behavior traditions. This long period of occupation has left its footprints not only in the Baltic countries, but also outside them. Also, this perception is decreasing. It is still possible to meet less educated people who don't know much about Latvian, Estonian, and Lithuanian languages, and who think that Russification during the Soviet era was so powerful that all people in the Baltics speak Russian. People meeting anybody from the Baltics often use the opportunity to learn what language they speak, how it's different, and to what group of languages it belongs. They are not always satisfied with the answer that the Latvian and Lithuanian languages are Baltic languages. They are willing to associate these languages with a closer one. Which language they are similar to? Is it Russian? Is it Finnish? My answer to everybody who definitely wants to associate these languages to any of big languages or neighboring countries is that Baltic languages are similar to themselves. Latvian and Lithuanian are independent languages forming their own branch of languages. So we should not be similar to anybody. When it comes to distinguish the Baltic region from USSR, one important matter is quite distinct. The story of deportations of Baltic residents is quite well known in Czech Republic. This is thanks to famous film festival Mene Tekel, bringing a new film presenting the issues of deportation every year to Czech Republic. This is very fortunate, as every new generation should be educated about this brutal crime committed against peaceful people, though it would not repeat in the future. My last point is by mixing up the names of the countries of Lithuania and Latvia. The Latvians who live here are well aware that a huge and seemingly unresolved problem is mixing up the names of countries of Latvia and Lithuania, usually in the favor of Lithuania. Lithuania is closer and maybe better known in the understanding of Czech people, as it is possible to read about the statehood of Lithuania in history textbooks. Various historical regions of Latvia had been under Polish, Swedish, and later Russian administration for centuries. It has not been easy for Latvians themselves to learn about all the changes in power. Therefore, it's not surprising that foreigners mix up all the historical administration names. The name of country of Latvia, as we know today, it emerged comparatively late in the beginning of the 20th century. I would like to finish my speech with recent events and challenges for future. During recent years, Baltic countries gained most recognition after international scandal of Verbatica, which resulted in expelling several Russian diplomats from Czech Republic. While Western countries were trying to define a uniform position, the Baltic countries expressed their solidarity with Czechs in a fast and harsh way by also expelling Russian diplomats. This step was received very positively by many Czechs and demonstrated a very similar distrust of Russia. According to the observations of the Embassy of Latvia in Prague, the last scandal related to expelling of the Russian diplomats from Czech Republic and later expelling from the Baltic countries in solidarity with the Czechs provided a huge positive contribution to recognition of Baltic countries. At this particular moment, when other countries were still hesitant, the Baltic countries responded decisively and with no delay. These actions were extensively presented by mass media. It was followed by numerous verbal and written expressions of gratitude addressed to the embassies of the Baltic countries. An anonymous person had even brought flowers to the Embassy of Latvia. So we can conclude that people remember the best events when their allies express their solidarity when it's needed most. The embassies of the Baltic countries, the Latvian Czech Friends Association, and everybody of us should continue to inform and work closely with our Czech colleagues and friends. We, ourselves, our pride in our land, state, and culture are the best advertisement for our countries and our part in the free and democratic West. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kristine. You are in time, but not our section. Yeah, it's my mistake, mea culpa, that we are short of time. So I suggest very short discussion and coffee break, and then the second section will start. Your questions, please. I see you prefer coffee. Yeah, similar to me. Yeah, okay. I can declare our section for closed. Thank you very much for active cooperation, all three participants, and thank you for public. Thank you for your coming and listening.
Příspěvek. Takže, aby jsme šetřili čas, k tomu i přejdeme. Dnes oslovujeme 100leté výročí uznání Estonska, Litvy a Lotyšska Československem de jure. Toto uznání předurčilo a nadále předurčuje celkový rámec, charakter moderních dějin a kulturně-politických vztahů, jejichž součástí jsme. Před 100 lety Estonsko, Litva a Lotyšsko jednotně vkročili do současné Evropy, proto dnes disponují regulérním diplomatickým sborem v České republice a naopak. Ovšem při pohledu na ony dnes svorné pobaltské státy je třeba si uvědomovat též podstatných rozdílů. Jeden z nich, přítomnost nebo absence státnosti před rokem 1918. Litovci na rozdíl od jiných baltských národů historickou státnost totiž měli. Ke státnímu sjednocení Litovců dochází v obraně před německými řády v první polovině 13. století. Sjednotitelem Litvy je Mindaugas, jenž je v roce 1250.
In 1253 was the first and the last rule of Lithuania, who was crowned the king. At the end of his rule, the piece of work chronograph comes into existence, and that is in 1262, and it is a vast historiographic work in which Lithuania seeks a place in the world history. Namely, from that time, that is from the moment when a new state form was established, and we see the rise of Lithuanian Grand Dukes on the European political scene, we can see and observe the diplomatic relations between Czech Kingdom and Lithuanian or Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Of course, these ancient relationships between the two countries, that is, the contact between persons, between the rulers, was occasional, and it differs from contemporary diplomatic practice. Lithuania was diplomatically linked later. It is good to recall that as a result of diplomatic strivings of Polish Queen Hedwika in 1397, here in Prague, at Prague University, the Lithuanian College was established in 1399, and it lasted until 1622, and today it has its representation in a form of Baltic studies of the philosophical faculty of the Charles University. In 1358, Charles IV sent his personal envoy to Lithuania. These are the statutes of the college. So I repeat, in 1358, Charles IV sent his personal envoy, Arnošt from Pardubice, to Lithuania. He was the Archbishop of Prague, and he was supposed to prepare conditions for baptism. However, Algirdas and Kestutis had two big requirements. And later, so the diplomatic mission was not successful. However, it was not the end of attempting to set up diplomatic relationships. There was Kęstutis' son, whose name was Butautas. And in the documents of Charles IV, he was indicated as Grand Duke. The opinion prevails that says that before the Grand Duke came to the Czech lands, he attempted seizing the power. And therefore, because he was not successful, he fled to Königsberg. There are historical documents that prove his journey to Königsberg. However, it was a diplomatic step. It was not an attempt to seize power. Butautas led an army later, and then that was in 1365, and he led this army of monks to Lithuania. Later, he went back to Königsberg, and later he left for the court of Charles IV. He is the witness mentioned in documents dated between 1368 and 1377. And thanks to these documents, we can see where and when Butautas Henry was accompanying the ruler. The greatest number of documents concern the journey of Charles IV to Italy between 1368 and 1369. Modena, Roma, and Lucca, these are places which were visited. It is possible that Butautas accompanied the emperor on his last journey to Paris, which was May 1377. There are other documents that indicate the Grand Duke as the king. We have in mind the poem Der Litauer that depicts a magical conversion of Lithuanian king and his baptism. Charles IV recognized the aristocratic origin of this Christian refugee and took care of him. Henry died in Prague as a result of a plague in 1380, and he is buried in the Church of St. Thomas at Malá Strana in Prague. We should emphasize ethnicity of persons who were included in the household of the Lithuanian Duke. Most of his companions were Prussians. These Prussians, they were members of the staff of the Prague court of Grand Duke. Some of these people probably served him when in Lithuania before coming to Bohemia. Henry left together with his brother Survila and 15 loyal companions. Diplomatic engagement of Lithuanian Grand Duke Mr. Hoskovets writes, Butautas Henry had access to the emperor, and he accompanied him on his Italian journey between 1368 and 1369. Of course, he had his own political agenda. Butautas Henry was keeping his court in Prague, and because he was an immigrant or exilant, he didn't have a political power. That's why he was in need of courtiers and diplomats. There were not Lithuanians who would have a European education. However, there were Prussians. And it was quite natural that Butautas turned namely to them to serve him. As regards these diplomats acting in the service of Lithuanian envoy Butautas, alias Lithuanian king in exile, is indicated in the list of townsmen of the old town of Prague. Peter Prus is mentioned in this list. Also, other persons are mentioned in this list, and there is another Henry who was the royal envoy. The ruler of Lithuania, with his residence in Prague, was a loyal servicemen in relation to Lithuania. That is, after unsuccessful situation in 1350. In Latin, he was supposed to pursue Lithuanian interests. It is a pity that he died of plague so suddenly, because the situation could have evolved differently. Instead of Jagiellonian Europe, there might have been Europe ruled by Butautas Henry. So he, in fact, adopted Christianity, and he replaced his cousin. European diplomatic mission of Butautas is extremely important for us also in the field of philology. The ruler of Lithuania is associated with the origin of the oldest Baltic written art. What we have in mind is Basel colophon that that came into existence in 1369 during Vigilia in Siena or Lucca. Antonio Bonacci is the name. The colophon was written and then rewritten. A Prussian from the group of Butautas Henry, who was accompanying Charles IV on his journey to Italy in 1368-69. A middle-aged intellectual who came from Prussia and who served Lithuanian envoy can be identified with Peter Prus from the new town in Prussia, Prussian land. In 1413, upon the instruction of Vytautas, a certain monk Petrik came to Prague, and he was holding negotiations in the matters of the Grand Duke who died. He also ordered death mass in the Church of Augustinians at Malá Strana in Prague. In conjunction with the anniversary next year, that is 2023, it would be really apt to commemorate this event, because we should commemorate this Butautas and Servila, and the Mass might be served there. In 2023, Prague Linguistic Circle and the Institute for Lithuanian Language plan to publish a book dealing with the Prague court of Butautas as a place where unique and extremely good conditions for the development of Baltic writings were formed. This publication can be enriched with a very important document, and they are depiction of seals of the Grand Duke of Lithuania. Thank you very much for your attention.
Unfortunately, this is not through the mic, can't be translated. Good afternoon. František Skorina from Polotsk, the founder of book printing in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. who in 1517 published a book in Prague, which is now considered to be the first Belarusian publication, and is right to take one of the leading places in the Belarusian culture. But only speaking of him in a Belarusian tradition would be disrespectful to the publisher himself. I will now speak of Skorina as a common name in the Czech and the Lithuanian culture. There are numbers, hundreds of crossings, which was stressed by Jaroslav Lach, who said that there were no other peoples who would be as close to Slavs as Lithuanians are. There were many exchanges in years, beneficial to both sides, and Skorina is one of the outstanding names. Skorina prepared the print of Biblia Ruskaya, or the first Bible in the old Slav language. In his typography, in 1525, the Prostschau was printed, and before it, in 1522, Malaya Podorozhnaya Knižka, which is now commemorated as the start of book printing in Lithuania. In the Grand Duchy, the book was well known among the rich nobility. And the first aspects of book printing started to penetrate Lithuania in the late 15th century. He also founded the Grand Royal Garden in Prague. Ruthenian Skorina as the royal gardener to the king and later Emperor of Rome, Ferdinand, was one to bring the ideas of gardening. Then his ancestors continued his work. His son worked as a gardener. It wasn't by chance that Skorina appeared in the Czech lands. At that time, 3 versions of translation of biblical texts were known. At the time when Skorina got the idea to run his project, but certainly he knew about the Prague book business and its successes. It was an attempt by a Lithuanian to understand a part of the Western culture. He was from the Orthodox tradition, which he knows quite well, but still he works with masters who were educated on the local book business. What he considered to be a novelty wasn't one in the Western context. But his book project became a big deed in the Czech book culture. It was a symbiosis which hasn't been seen before. Ilya Lemeshkin observed that Skorina's action was the first impulse by a bourgeois in the Czech environment. It was the portrait was taken in the context of other culture, but the most interesting is the quasi-portrait of the Russian Bible. This crypto-portrait can be taken in context of Botticelli's adoration of the Magi, which became the part of the gospel scene. It meant a full involvement into the finished picture. He and his followers used the same pattern in the Czech book business. It was an absolute novelty for the European book printing. Not all the portraits are attributed to Skorina. Some of them became and remain controversial. Also, the fact that in publishing of books, Skorina introduced some elements of Renaissance. Symbols can be seen that lived in the European tradition but were totally unknown in the Grand Duchy. The elements of book culture were then offered to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, but unfortunately were repelled. Later, however, this approach was used for other projects during the times of Simon Budny. Skorina took another path and found asylum in Russia, where they didn't want to see Skorina during his lifetime. Skorina was forgotten for a long time. It seemed to be an unused legacy in the part of Lithuania that was taken over by Poland. New Bible publication appeared. But now Skorina is no more forgotten. Josef Dobrovsky, the father of Slavonic studies, took up the legacy of Skorina and became the first professional researcher of his works. Names appeared which could not avoid Skorina's memory. Františka Sokolova, the daughter of Jan Patočka, described all this at the end of the 20th century. The name was half forgotten in centuries, but now it returned to the Czech culture, and it was in the Charles University, where in the Czech language, first PhD thesis was defended in 1926. Now the scientific or academic community puts an effort into bringing Skorina back into the Czech context and showing on examples how exactly he was connected to the Czech culture, and his wood carving and other traditions are renewed. I am convinced that further traces of his will be revealed. There are a number of directions I would like to draw your attention to. We can see that an immense demand for František Skorina can be observed both in Lithuania and in the Czech Republic, including the references to the sources. In the Czech Republic is 370 words. In Lithuania, it's 390 words. In Russia, in the Wikipedia, the article contains 3,000 words. In Belarusian, the article contains 10,000 words. Thus, we can see the change in the understanding of Skorina's importance for both Czech and Lithuanian culture. Apart from specialists, this Renaissance publisher is not perceived in the Czech and Lithuanian awareness very widely. Rarely do people know what made him celebrated and commemorated. It can be asked, is it important at all, centuries after his death, to revive his name, which has been taken over by the Belarusian culture? It turned up that it is important, especially at the time when the authoritarian forces in Belarus tried to take the memory over. Lithuanian friends come to help the friendly people of Belarus. With gratitude, he is commemorated in the commemoration organized by Lithuanian circles. The oppressed activists from Belarus and Russia can join. The unusual figure of Skorina fully deserves being a celebrity. The material legacy can be remembered and can put the Orthodox and Catholic tradition together. And that is very important, especially today. And all parties will have their benefit. Skorina stands above all modern-day cultures and nations and remains an indivisible part of the Grand Duchy. He wrote in Russia and called himself Ruthenian, but he has nothing in common with Russia apart from the attempts to show him as a resident of St. Petersburg. It is also wrong to speak of him as a great Belarusian doctor. It is difficult to show the relationship. He was a Lithuanian, and we cannot speak of him as of Czech, though there are also attempts to show him in the lines of Czech and Hussite tradition. It is a name which is common for Czech and Lithuanian culture and for the Polish, Ukrainian, Belarusian, and Russian one as well. The name can serve in bringing nations together. Thank you.
Speaker is not speaking into the microphone. Interpreters cannot hear.
When the speaker doesn't speak on the microphone, his words can't be translated.
Já už tedy končím, takže...
Coming to an end. He even doesn't have a request to be able to participate at the conference or to attend. He is getting scholarship, Václav Havel scholarship. So this illustrates what we have been discussing here. This illustrates the representation of the political representatives. Now, let me pass the floor to Józef Vyškovský, who will speak about Baltic countries and regional concept of Central Europe. Hello. It's great to be able to address you and to make a contribution which will not be very typical. Most of the speeches or papers focus on a certain topic that illustrates Czech and Baltic countries' relationships. My contribution is broader. These relationships between Czechoslovakia and Baltic countries is just one part of it. I am a geographist, and I prepared a contribution about Baltic countries as a part of Central Europe. I can argue against it at the very beginning, because each of you has a certain opinion of Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, whether these countries belong to Eastern Europe or Central Europe, probably Central Eastern Europe. We have such regional concepts. And Baltic countries, they represent a very interesting object of interest for the study of these European regions, macro regions, because influences can be seen there. So I'll try to stick to the subject of the conference, and I will focus on these regional concepts of Baltic countries. How do these three countries fit in these concepts? We can note, or whether we speak about Baltic countries as a part of Central Europe or Central Eastern Europe or any other European macro region, what is typical is the fact that Baltic countries always represent a peripheral part of each of the concepts. What is also typical is the one direction of influences from different parts of Europe on Baltic countries. Then these influences get blended, they mix. And usually we tend to see the rule of other powers or countries, something that contributed to the assimilation or liquidation of cultures. So in opposition to this, there are hypotheses that say the opposite. Estonian political scientist, in his article published about 10 years ago, speaks about the different governments and rules taking turns. None of them lasted long enough to be able to assimilate Baltic cultures. He also proves this bringing examples of Western Europe or Eastern Europe that were subject to assimilation. Let us look at the geographic definition of Central Europe. We, the Czechs, we consider ourselves Central Europeans. However, everybody or people simply see Central Europe differently. There is a certain core of Central Europe, There are geographic works that include also Switzerland or Benelux, sometimes Baltic countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Regional concepts work or see Central Europe as an area of the ultimate cultural influences of selected European powers. Germany, Poland. I also indicate Austria-Hungary, which is also a concept. And I also put in brackets the influence of Czech lands, because the transfer of cultural connections can be seen. What we have listened to today, these contributions illustrate the fact that the Czech lands vis-à-vis Baltic countries or vis-à-vis Central Europe always had something to contribute to the development. These areas, or this definition of Central Europe can be based on a certain word, Central Europe, Mittel-Europa. And there are others that use the expression intermediate Europe or the bridge. Then another concept that is from the 20th century, and that is Central European Europe, which is European West that was under the influence of European East. And I also indicate in brackets also the influence of cultural inspiration coming from the Czech lands. Speaking and asking why Baltic countries should be included in Central Europe, I think we should and could find different reasons, including, for example, the arrival of Christianity, because it came from the Central Europe to Baltic countries. And mathematical and geographic view saying that Baltic countries are the center. You see the photograph that illustrates the place not far from Vilnius. And this topic, how to define the center, the middle of a certain space or environment or surroundings. So that's the mathematical construct, which is quite objective. So this center of Europe can be placed here or in Slovakia or in some other parts of Central Europe. Let me introduce these individual concepts. That is the bridge or intermediate Europe. There's the concept that is based on Austrian and Polish concepts. Central Europe is perceived as a place which ensures intermediation of contacts, contacts between Western and Eastern Europe. We can find also some distinctions. While the Polish concept is long-term, focusing on cultural politics, The Austrian one is more political and also applied only during the existence of Austria-Hungary. So, Baltic countries, the area of the ultimate or the farthest Polish influence is covering or reaches Poland, today's Baltic countries, Belarus, Western Ukraine, and also, for a short time, Czech and Hungarian kingdoms. Most of Latvia was a part of it only for a very short time, while Estonia not at all, and Lithuania for a longer period of time. We can see that this concept concerns mostly Lithuania, probably eastern part of Latvia, and these are examples of the connections, cultural and political, between the countries mentioned. That's also proven by the existence of certain persons from the area of culture politics. Lithuania is present in Central Europe via Poland, but the Polish represent quite a significant nationality, national minority in Lithuania. That is after more than 100 years. This influence of Poland and including Baltic countries into this regional approach is weaker, especially if we divide the map of Latvia. We see that the Polish concept can include the eastern part and also Kuransko, which was also a part of Polish and Lithuanian state, and southern Estonia. Those of you who spent time in Latgale, you will recall that the spirit of Polish-Lithuanian state can be felt there. Mentality of the population and some structures, buildings in the country indicate this. Latgale belongs to one of the most interesting places, and the Polish and Lithuanians who are bearers of the same regional approach. They represent quite a big part of the population. So this was the first regional approach or concept. Now, Middle Europe, Europa, that's the German concept that defines Central Europe in opposition Russia and the West. And Germany is considered the heart of Central Europe. This was mentioned in the 19th and 20th century quite often. Central Europe, this term, was mentioned for the first time in Germany at the beginning of the 19th century. This map is not very clear, but it illustrates the synthesis of different works that look at Central Europe from different perspectives.
Regions can be counted in that probably we would perceive elsewhere, Benelux or big regions of the Balkans and indeed parts of the Baltic countries. In the Baltic countries, as you know, we have two main regions which were under the influence of Germany. It was the Eastern Prussia, which is also a part of today's Lithuanian territory called the Little Lithuania, and more sizable part of the then Livonian state. In terms of Baltic states, it's an important region. The center of education acted as an inspiring environment in which roots were found by some representatives of Lithuanian, but also Latvian and Belarusian national renaissance. Some sort of memory is kept in architecture and in the Catholic and Lutheran community and small religious community which now exists by the southeastern border of Lithuania today. Livonia is an entity which is much sizable, and during its biggest territorial upsurge, it took a big part of the existing Belarusia and Estonia. Though the Livonian state hasn't been in existence for many years now, some influences were kept there, such as the position of German nobility and gentry. Also, names came up from it are known in the German environment, a number of personalities who lived and worked here. The next regional approach I mentioned at the beginning, I will now discuss in more detail, is the Central and Eastern Europe, which is a very technical name used only since the 1990s, when the post-socialist part of Europe is being transformed and moves back to closer to West or Western Europe. There is a number of publications and papers, not only geographical ones, but also literature, which express their view on the matter. Milan Kundera wrote an essay in the mid-1980s saying that it's a region which was kidnapped from the West and is subnormally held by the East. And he also speaks of it as the eastern border of the West. Such thoughts were also expressed by other writers, such as Czesław Miłosz, the well-known Pole, who in one of his essays wrote that the only thing known about the region is that there are cold winters there. And that was written in 1959. There are a number of scholars who have the necessary knowledge, such as the political science representative of France, Jacques Rupnik. He spoke of that space as the other Europe. Also, a team of scholars under the leadership of Hlaváček and Romancov published the so-called neighborhoods of European Orient, which mean the Balkans and Russia. Though not emphasized, implicitly this view is concealed in the work by Timothy Snyder, The Bloody Lands. He uses that name for the space in which there was already conflict between Russia and Nazi Germany took place. Since the 1990s, in the media, the term used is Central and Eastern Europe to show the part of Europe that moved from the state-owned economy to market one. And also the transformation is taken into account. In this map, what we see is what we can attribute to Central and Eastern Europe. It's from an article from the 1990s by a German author. In the same map, the Southeastern Europe is shown as another space for the transformation from socialist society towards a democratic one. We thus can say that it's not really a region, but rather a belt of countries which are put together not by strong cultural links, but rather temporary factors are tightly connected to the modern history of the 20th century. The Baltic region is the only part that is partially Protestant, and also the only part which was occupied by the Soviet Union. Nearing the end of my paper, I will mention the regional concept and the cultural influence by Czech lands. Some works can be found there which show or discuss some historic stages when Czechs had the tendency to view themselves as the chosen nation of Europe and the main carriers of European character. Hlaváček, in some of his latest works, underscores that. When we look at this approach, we can be aware that the Baltic region is one of the areas where some support for that idea can be found. The cultural influence of the Czech lands in the Baltics was only cultural. No aspiration of political or power character can be found there. The links are only or mostly one way, and compared to the previous views, this one is less supported or underpinned by strong arguments. But the Czech influence in the Baltics has no negative connotations. And there are even trends to idealize it. There are some demonstrations of the Czech influence going towards the Baltic region. During this conference, there will be a number of papers that will show the thing in much more detail. Therefore, in my rather synthesizing intervention, I will not speak of them. Summarizing the views on Central Europe, we can arrive at several conclusions. The German and the Polish concept are competing, and in a way, they are subdividing Baltics between themselves because some of the regions went through Germanization or Polonization, depending on where Christianity came from. I already said that the Baltic region is rather a peripheral area. And mostly the influences go one way into the region. And let me also compare with the regional perceptions of Eastern and Northern Europe. The concept of Central Europe is more subtle, but it works for a longer time. Let me now make use of the fact that I am on the mic now. I would rather speak of one idea which was provoked in me by the name of this conference, the Czech and Baltic Century.
We, geographists, like to pay attention to the terminology of geography. This is a diagram that discusses geographic names or adjectives derived from them. How they should be used from the perspective of geography. Baltic Sea and the Balts, the Baltic population, that is Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians. In the past, there were many more tribes and ethnic groups. In Czech, we have adjective Baltský, Baltic for both these names. So we can mean this huge space around Baltic Sea, or we can include only Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. That's why in Czech we have the word Pobaltský. And that is the adjective used in certain occasions, that the term would include not only Latvia, Lithuania, but also Estonia. I also saw adjective Baltický, which in fact is a synonym of Pobaltský. Maybe this is a small appendix of my speech, but it might evoke a discussion. Thank you very much for attention. I would like to thank for a very interesting synthesis. We, in fact, kept our time. I think we have a topic for discussion, so I think we can open the discussion now. If there is somebody in the audience who would like to raise a question. My name is Šeferis. I am from Brno, from the University of Masaryk. It's not a question with what I want to share with you. It's rather a commentary. I would like to ask the moderator to get back once more to these new interpretations of the most ancient monuments, or why? Because people who did not study philology and are not specialists on philologists, they don't see that this is a radically new approach. Mr. Lemeshkin is bringing a completely new perspective, and my commentary is I would like to ask him to indicate where the Czech readers could read this information, because most of your publications are for Lithuanian readers. So where the Czechs can find out about this. It's a very difficult question because there are not many resources or sources. I have one article which was published about 4 years ago, and I'm sorry, I can't recall its title. Baltic texts of Prague. It can be found on internet. The article can be found on internet. The interpretation of the text is not finalized because the article was published and then new things became evident. So that's why I describe in my book, which was published in Lithuanian, Prague Linguistic Circle and our institute wish to publish it in other languages, that is in Russian and English as well. So let us hope that we will have a monography in a few years' time. I'm sure this is quite interesting because there is a link between these writings and Prague Royal Court, and that Basel colophon, which is the oldest Lithuanian writing, and also one document from the Crete, 1422, which is also linked to the Czech environment. Petrus Turnau is the author who studied at Prague University, then in Bologna. He took a journey to the Crete in 1422, and most probably he was a student of the first generation of students of Lithuanian college in 1411, 1412. That was the year when the college was opened. There are several texts. We are primarily interested in those who are also in one of the Baltic languages. Thank you. Are there any other contributions to the discussion? I would like to raise a question to Mr. Miszkowski. How can we address this terminology confusion, in inverted commas? I think this is a question that is addressed to all of you, because I see the faces that I know, and we all are interested in the topic. I believe that Czech language has an advantage because the English word Baltic describes in different connotations different territorial entities. So it can be, again, our Baltic, Lithuanian, Latvia, Estonia. It can also cover the Baltic Sea. Well, I feel that I know Czech language, and I think that it's always good to really prepare good terminology that can depict and show these very soft nuances of the language. I feel that probably the word Baltic for 3 countries is a mechanical translation from English, which we all encounter. That's why we tend to use the expression also with respect to the 3 Baltic countries. And I think it would be nice if Czech language really preserves also the other word that is pobaltský. Thank you. Dalia? It's quite interesting, this discussion. Baltic, or in Czech pobaltský. In Lithuanian,